Hello, welcome to this episode of White Glove Geography. Today we're going to be looking at the feedback on the climate change assessment version number 2. Here we've got the first question, and it asks to describe the change in the amount of CO2 between 1910 and 1980. The key things to note on this, the question relates to changes, so therefore you've got to talk about the increase or decrease. And also there's two dates in there, 1910 and 1980. So we really need to see on the graph there's kind of two separate areas. You'll see there between 1910 and 1950 it's kind of like a steady increase, and 1950 to 1980 there's a more rapid increase. Also you need to be including data, reference to years, also the units in there, which is ppm or parts per million. Here's an example of a nice answer. So it says CO2 steadily increases from 300 parts per million, or ppm, in 1910 to 310 ppm in 1950. There was then a more rapid increase from 340 ppm of CO2 between 1950 and 1980. So pause here and just see, does yours match pretty similarly what happens here? The things that we're looking for is, have you got the units? Now in any aspect of geography, when there's an abbreviation, the first time that you write it out full, and then in brackets put the abbreviation afterwards. And then once you've got the abbreviation, you can then use it from there on in your assessment forwards. We've got the reference of steady increase. We've also recognised there's an increase that's more rapid between 1950 and 1980. It's not a very long answer, but you can see all the skills that are in there. Next question. Name one natural reason that might have contributed to the changes that have been shown in figure 1. And of course figure 1 was the one we've previously just seen about the increase in CO2. The focus is natural reasons. So we're not on about human reasons, we're not on about burning of fossil fuels or anything like that. It's got to be a natural reason. Here's some that we might want to choose from. So volcanic activity, orbit change, and of course if you want to include Milankovitch cycles in that, that'd be great. Also solar output, or sometimes solar flares. Next one, outline 2 other natural ways that contribute to climate change. Now we've got it says other, so whatever you wrote in the previous question you can't include in this question. It's the two different ones. So it's got to be different than the ones mentioned in the previous question. There's going to be 1 mark for a basic description. So you look at it and you go, the person knows what they're on about, but there's not a lot of detail in there. 2 marks, there's going to be some development. And hasn't got to include all of these, but there's going to be some examples, maybe place names, some geography words. Here's an example. So I've put all 3 on here. Of course, you won't have written all 3. You've only talked about 2 of them. So volcanoes erupt and release gases in the atmosphere, which heats up the Earth. So you can see that's 1 mark. That's 1 simple point. The student knows what they're on about. The next point is volcanoes erupt and release ash and sulfur dioxide. So now we've got geography words, which causes the greenhouse effect. So now we've got a process. That's because it traps heat in the atmosphere. So that's 2 marks. You can see afterwards it's got development, key terms, it's got the processes, orbit change, and then we've got solar output. So I'm not going to read through those because you can easily pause here and read through the answers. Next question. Compare the reliability of 2 different methods of measuring climate change. Here's some possible ideas. It's not an exhaustive list, but they're the typical ones that students might include. So ice cores, tree rings, pollen analysis, direct instrument readings, historical records. So then we've got 4 marks for this. So 1 mark is a basic understanding of maybe just one of those. Second, 2 marks is maybe a basic understanding, and it's got to be some reference to reliability, because the word reliability is included in the question. 3 marks, definitely including 2 methods. There's some comparison going on, and there's a good understanding of how they work and the reference to reliability. Number 4, we often think of number 4, the top marks of, if you could transpose that into a textbook, it would be pretty similar to what the textbook answer might be. We'd be thinking about reliability, reference to the ease of collection of the method, and also maybe over time periods. Here's some examples. So a 1 mark might be, ice cores are good because it shows the temperature a long time ago. That's just a simple answer. It doesn't really reference the reliability, but it shows an understanding of the method. Or maybe, tree rings are good because the width of the tree tells you about the temperature. Again, it's pretty simple. It doesn't tell us what about the temperature. So 2 marks would be maybe both of those together because you've got 2 simple points. And the top marks, 4 marks, would be something like, we're going to use ice cores and we're going to also use instrument readings for this 4 marks. You could use whichever one you want. So although analysis of ice cores, so we're going to talk about more CO2 shows that it's warmer and more O2 shows it's colder, that's a good way to measure climate change over the previous 20,000 years. It was less accurate the further you go back though. This is in comparison to direct instrument readings, so like thermometers, satellite measurements. They're very accurate and take place regularly all over the world. However, these records only go back 100 years. So we're talking about the reliability, and we're talking about a time scale, we're talking about how they work. And the key themes at the bottom is, generally, if they're easy to collect, they don't go back very far. And if they're harder to collect, they tend to go back a little bit further. So we're thinking about sedimentary rock cores, thinking about ice cores, thinking about pollen analysis. They're a bit trickier to collect. Outline ways in which climate change may have positively and negatively impacted upon people in the future. So 1 mark is a basic description of the impacts, and 2 marks is going to be development, maybe examples, place names, geography words, so exactly the same things that keep coming up. If you reference the environmental, so that isn't asked in the question, we will accept that as long as the environmental then has an impact upon people. So here's a possible answer. So a positive effect on people is that in UK, different types of crops can be grown if there's climate change. So that's 1 mark. If we want 2 marks, it might be a positive economic effect. So think about the category on people is that people in the southeast of the UK, so coming up with an area, there are now vineyards producing UK wine, and they used to be very rare. A negative effect on people is that we're more coastal flooding. That's a simple point, 1 mark. A negative effect on people is that due to global warming, the ice caps in Greenland or in the Antarctic will melt, and that causes sea level rise. This leads to coastal flooding in low-lying areas such as, and you can name one where you know there's been coastal flooding. So that'd be the 2nd mark. Explain how deforestation and agriculture may cause long-term climate change. Now, there's loads of ways that long-term climate change can be caused, and we're only talking about deforestation and we're only talking about agriculture. So these are the human causes of climate change. We're not about the natural causes of climate change, so solar output of volcanoes. We're only talking about the human causes, and only these 2. Same as before, there's 2 parts of the question, so a maximum of 2 marks for each. First mark is a basic outline, so a simple point shows you know what you're on about, and a 2nd mark is clear development of the causes, and again, examples, place names, geography words. So a simple mark might be, deforestation causes climate change because trees take in CO2. The 2nd mark would be deforestation in the Amazon, so we've named a place, and tropical rainforest, so we've named the biome. Amazon tropical rainforest reduces the long-term ability of the forest to absorb CO2, which is a significant greenhouse gas. Agriculture. Increasing the number of cows in the land means there's more greenhouse gases that are released by the animals. That's a simple point, that's 1 mark. For 2 marks, cattle ranching, so now we're naming an activity, in the Amazon increases the number of cows, and they release methane as part of their digestive system. And methane is 25 times worse than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So we've named a gas, we've said how much worse it is, we've named a place, we've named an activity, and we've talked about the process of digestive systems. So we've got a statement. Many groups of people believe that climate change cannot be stopped or reversed. Therefore, all of our efforts need to be put into changing how we live. Implicitly in there, we've got the stopped and reversed, and straight away you know that's mitigation. So let's reread the question. Many groups of people believe that climate change should be mitigated. So that's stopped and reversed. Therefore, all of our efforts need to be put into changing how we live. And of course, that's adaptation. So with mitigation and adaptation in that statement there, that's what our answer needs to be focused around. Explain the ways in which we can respond to climate change. And of course, from that question, we've got two ways, which is mitigation and adaptation. A level 1, so it kind of doesn't matter how much you write on this, it's the amount of detail that you write. Of course, you're probably going to be pretty up to the point. If you're writing and getting full marks, you're going to be right up to that last line, because that's how it's designed. But if you're writing level 1 content constantly and you don't get beyond basic responses, then you'll just stick at maybe 1, maybe 2 marks. If you get to level 2 responses, you've developed your ideas. You've talked about adaptation and mitigation and some AO2 in there. So you're saying this means that, this results in. If you've got level 3, and that's going to be peppered throughout your answer, there's a clear understanding and you've got use of AO1, AO2, AO3. So AO1 is data, geography words, place names, examples. AO2, develop your ideas with which means that. And AO3, throughout your work, you're going to say this is significant because, and of course you must write a conclusion. Here's a possible answer. Yours will definitely look different depending what you've changed, but here's the structure. We can respond to climate change to mitigate or stop the causes, so straight away you've identified the key word. This could include using alternative energy supplies such as solar and wind, so that's AO1, you've given examples. Which means that, so that's AO2, the amount of fossil fuels such as coal, gas and oil is reduced. That results in less greenhouse gases such as CO2 being released into the atmosphere. Although this will be effective in the long term, so now we're into the AO3 mini conclusion, although this will be effective in the long term, countries such as the UK have not yet fully moved away from using fossil fuels in power stations. Alternatively, we can use adaptation strategies to show how we live in order to respond to the effects of climate change. This could include building higher sea walls, which means, that's AO2, the risk of coastal flooding caused by higher sea levels will be reduced. And now we're into the AO3. This is likely to be successful in the short term. However, in the longer term, seawalls might not be large enough and they are costly. And then, of course, finally, your conclusion. In conclusion, it is more important to, and then you choose whichever one you've talked most about, you can talk best about. This is because, and then refer to the kind of the wider context of this, the long-term, short-term, social, economic, environmental, and is a local or global aspect. Don't include all of those because your conclusion will be far too long. But if you can reference a couple of those, short or long, and then maybe social, economic, or environmental, and if it applies, maybe local or global, then that would be perfect.